Hi everyone, Susan Corbett, custom machine quilter here with this gorgeous quilt to show you today. It is a wool hand applique quilt on a cotton background. And there is so much background here. So one of the first questions you ask on a quilt like this is, are all the blocks to be quilted as different blocks, or is all the background one great big background? We chose to go for a simpler quilting scheme, simpler in one sense, because it looks pretty complex here, but that's just the choice of some background. I could have done all kinds of things in here, put in what I like to call the architecture. Do some straight lines, some big circles or big squares or something to section things off. But we opted for one background. It'll go a little bit faster that way. It'll be maybe less interesting, but that's in the eye of the beholder. We were not aiming to go all out. This is a custom job, but it's not the most complex thing I could come up with. Not by a long shot. So, as usual, I'm stabilizing the whole thing. And that means quilting in the ditch where indicated, between sashing and border around the perimeter, and then edge stitching right around all the appliqué. I am using a really pale beige of Superior So Fine thread. And at this point, well, this is where the ideas start pouring in. When you're going around all these little pieces, although we could do this, or what if we did that? Those ideas come in. And how much of this do I want to put in? What parts of the wool do I want to nail down with this color thread or delay for a thread change later on down the road? What parts can I quilt right now since I'm already there, so I don't have to do a stop and start later on down the road? And if I do opt to do some background quilting at this point, what am I going to do? Do I even know? I did not edge stitch around the wing right here because I thought that would require a darker thread color. I don't want any of that quilting to show up, so I put that off till later. And here it was occurring to me, I bet I could quilt inside the flower, but I don't exactly know. So I put it off for a minute. I'm thinking that part over. This is so worth doing. I know a lot of people just want to blow this part off completely because it's a lot of work and it's tedious and time consuming, and that will raise the price. But I have all kinds of evidence that it is worth doing. If you don't quilt around it, it's going to look lumpy and bumpy. Doing the outline quilting here is going to make it polished and tailored and really good. So here I thought, well, let's just try. Let's see how this thread is going to look on that fabric. And of course, the thread sank right in and you can't even really see it. So I wish that had occurred to me sooner, but whatever. No problem. I even used this thread to quilt on the strawberries themselves. You can't see the thread there either. The wool pieces on this quilt, a lot of them are pretty darn small, so there wasn't a lot of that to fool with. But I think in some places you might be surprised where quilting on the wool really paid off big time. All right, and here, this is where I'm going to go ahead and outline it and add some background quilting, so I don't have to come in there again. A lot of times if you quilt right on or right across the embroidery, you won't see it, and I was a little bit hesitant about that on here because the embroidery is black. But I don't know. You start off quilting a quilt with a lot of apprehension and fear, and then quickly that all goes out the window, and I become a lot more emboldened and go for it. So, how did I decide on a background? The decisions we made up front were just drop in some butterflies and some flowers, and then all the rest of it will be background. And the background fabric itself has a lot of dots all over it. So I use that as my cue to do something circular. So it's crescents and circles with a lot of echo, basically, is what's happening here. And it's nice to get that bit of immediate payoff up front. This will give you a good sense of what that's going to look like, and I am happy with it. So therefore, emboldened, I'm now going for the strawberries. I'm just quilting in between the leaves and the berry itself. That's all. Doesn't require too much. And since these berries were not too close to the bird and that plant itself, they're going to require a stop and start of their own. I love the extra embroidery the maker of the quilt put in. Those little dots make those berries come to life. I'd say most of this quilt was done freehand, but I'm trying to learn how to use the computerized part of the machine. So some of the stuff I could freehand, I went ahead and tried to find a motif that I could drop in with the use of the computer to learn how to enlarge or reduce, rotate, cut some parts off of, add to, I'm looking for ways to learn how to use it to customize. And there's what that finished block looked like. Okay, so here I found a butterfly to put in there, and here was the flower I chose. That was harder to do than I thought it was going to be, but I'm mostly pleased with the results. Here over the ship, I see all the billowing clouds or whatever. That's a computer design. This is an anchor. I used freezer paper to put in there, and that ship's wheel I circled because I saw that the background quilting was going to make that design get lost. Here's the back of the quilt. You can see more easily what's going on there. So with all those elements dropped in, then I could start the background quilting. And I did this next because that was going to be the bulk of the quilting on this quilt. And I didn't want to change threads at this point and do some other element when there was this much quilting to get through. So as I mentioned earlier, the background quilting is circular. I'm doing arcs and swirls and echo. Basically whatever is going to fit in the shape. You know, some of these spaces are pretty little. And I was trying for this not to be very arduous and not take forever to do. The background quilting went faster than I thought it was going to, but there is still quite a bit of it. There I put in an elongated swirl and am doing some echo because there was room for it to be in there. And that would make it more interesting than just the same over and over and over. I think you can also see where there is room, I've put in a few leaves that sort of resemble the appliqué a little bit. This is the zen of quilting, where you just go and flow begins to happen and you forget what time it is and where you are, and that's a nice happy feeling. I like to vary the size of these little elements when I can. See, obviously in this space, the size is dictated to me. It's pretty little, so those little echoes and arcs and what have you are going to have to be pretty small. But where there's room, it's nice to quilt a larger element, because if all the quilting is the same size, it's really boring. I see a lot of quilts where people, you know, all their background quilting is always all the same size. And it's pretty and it's good, but I think it would be much more interesting with different sizes. Now here it's nice to add a leaf because look at all that room in there. So I'm putting in a leaf that resembles the appliquéd leaf. And then you want to echo that. And then look at what's coming up. See, at the moment I want the background quilting to slide in seamlessly with that I've already done and still maneuver skillfully around the leaf I've just quilted. But there's that butterfly coming up. And it occurs to me that parts of that are going to get lost in the background quilting. So some of that's going to have to be a little bit different. I'm going to echo it so there's some space between the background quilting and the butterfly. But then look at the space underneath. So that's going to take some teeny tiny background quilting. So it's going to look like there's nothing under him but space. Had I done large quilting in there, well, as large as the space would allow, it's going to further obscure those bottom lines of the butterfly. And I can always echo or backtrack over something I've already done to get to the other side if need be. But I'm loving how the background quilting is really accentuating that delicate little butterfly whose parts could really easily get lost. And what's the point of doing all that work if you're not going to see it? This is also a quilt where I think it's important, at least on this one, to use a matching thread for the backgrounds. The fabric is busy already, the print. There's 2 colors already happening there. And I want to feature the appliqué. So this was not the moment to reach for a contrasting thread. This is exactly where you want it to match. Now for the flowers and the butterfly, I could have used a little bit of a darker thread, but there's nothing wrong with those elements being subtle. I think that's just great. On this yellow flower here, I think you can tell, I ditch quilted between the oval and the darker gold body of the flower. I outlined it and then I quilted right around that center oval. It gives it dimension. I think that looks great. See what the background quilting did for that butterfly? I love it. Okay, all the backgrounds are done, so it's time to move on to the border. There's a lot happening in the interior of the quilt. And so even though the border is an opportunity to do some more playing in our playground here, I think you also need a place for the eye to rest. So, and maybe it was the client's suggestion just to do lines. Her plan initially was to scallop the border. So scalloping, you see how that would create some challenges for what quilting design to put in there. So I'm doing diagonal lines, which I've showed you any number of times. I think it'll be a wonderful frame for everything happening in the body of the quilt. And I'm opting for a space of about 3/4 of an inch in between pairs of lines, because I love that texture. You could do any number of variations on this design scheme, 3 lines or some kind of irregular sequence, 3 lines, 2 lines, 1 line. And that's wonderful, but then that presents all kinds of challenges, and it's easy to get lost and forget where you are, and then you're ripping, or the math doesn't work out, or you have to do some math in the first place. And these lines are going to change in the middle. They'll be going in a whole different direction. So I've marked my middle 2 ways. I put a pin, a flat head pin, where the middle is to remind me that it's coming right up. And 2, you see a fold line in there that I have put in with the help of what's called a Hera marker, Hera. It's a piece of plastic, like a plastic knife. You run it up and down the fabric against the edge of your ruler, and it creates a temporary crease. It won't stay there forever. That's a technique you use when you're going to quilt right now, because you come back later and it won't be there. And I bought this drafting tool at an art supply store. It's 45-degree angle here at the bottom of the screen. I'm using that constantly to make sure I've not veered too far off course. I'm not quilting with it. I'm just holding it up to the quilting I've already done to see if that angle is correct or if I need to do some adjusting. It's super easy to change the angle as you're going along. I mean, even with all the rulers and little measuring devices, it's not hard to quilt straight lines. It's just so super easy to mess them up. So I make little adjustments as I go. Which one of these lines needs to be widened a little bit or shortened, because those slight variances are not going to call attention to themselves. If I make drastic changes, you will see it. Otherwise, no. So when you change the angle you're working on, see, now I have no quilted lines to line up the lines of the ruler with. With ruler work, I'm always wishing I had a different ruler or a better ruler, or I'd done it differently or whatever. I read years ago that the best way to do lines is in a counterclockwise direction. You know, start anywhere, but quilt counterclockwise. And I thought, well, that can't be right. And I think it is right, because I have all kinds of experience having gotten it wrong. And that's no fun at all. Here, I ran out of bobbin thread, I believe is the problem, and I don't want to start over in the middle of a line, so I picked out quite a bit of it to start with a good fresh stop and start, so that line will be as straight as I can get it without overlapping threads or whatever. There was a time when I vowed I would never do lines because I just had so much trouble. And then one day I realized, well, I'll never be good at doing lines if I don't do them. So I did them badly at first. And this is when it's important to know when to rip and when to let it slide, on what fabric to try them on, when they're really going to show up, when they're really not, what I can get away with, what I cannot get away with. One time a client talked me into lines all over the whole quilt, and I did my level best to talk her out of it. And she insisted. And I told her, it's going to be bad, so brace yourself. You know, the judge is going to hate it. We're going to get marked off. You are not going to win a ribbon. Kiss it goodbye right now. And she won a first place, and she got high marks for having such perfect cross-hatching all over her quilt. And it was not perfect. It just had so few mistakes that it looked pretty good. There's a difference between lines when they're flat on a long arm and when they're hanging up straight in a show, which I think is fascinating. The eye sees what it wants to see, not what is really there. Now on to the details on the applique. So this big house is too big of a space to leave unquilted. That would be bad. So I'm quilting around the window panes and around the windows themselves. And that presents a little bit of a challenge because there's a great disparity between the light and darkness of the fabrics involved. So which thread to use? Well, I'm using the light colored thread here. I'm chancing it. This would be a great opportunity to practice perfect ditch quilting because I've never managed that yet. And that's working out well. I mean, obviously, I don't want to do a lot of quilting on this house, but a little bit is going to go a long way to making this look pretty good. And you can see I'm freehanding those straight lines. I read that in a book a long time ago. And I balked when I first heard it. I thought, there is no way. And then I started trying it. I wouldn't recommend it for long lines, but for little short lines, it's totally doable. And it's a great time saver. So I quilted around the windows and around the perimeter of the door. And now the roof. The roof is also too big to leave unquilted. And I did change thread color for this part of the house, I think. Maybe not much. This would be a good place for some contrasting thread anyway. There's not going to be so much of it that you'll really call attention to it. And, you know, there's any number of ways to quilt a roof. I just thought this scallop would be in keeping with the mood of the quilt, and I didn't want it to be too tiny. That got done pretty quickly and looks really good. And I did ditch quilt underneath, but you know, between the roof and the house itself. This is where I guess you could plan out how many rows am I going to do. And I did not. I just went for it. And more often than not, it just works out. And it did. I felt pretty lucky here. On the left, that bee enclosure, I just did ditch quilting, but no quilting on the yellow. Here I'm ditch quilting between the pink and the brown. I ditch quilted on the lady herself or around the butterfly, just around that butterfly's middle. This is a little bit of a darker thread color, not much, and I'm adding the veins to the leaves now. This part can be a little bit tedious because it's just nothing but stops and starts, but I can't think of a way out of it unless you want to quilt the entire quilt in one thread color. That sometimes works, but not usually. See the leaves on the right? Those are embroidered already, and I didn't want to quilt around the embroidery, so I left those blank. There's always, you know, parts of a quilt that are just a judgment call. Those leaves were not so big that they needed something desperately. I don't know what the right thing to do was. This leaf is scalloped on one side, so I'm quilting it just a little bit differently. I quilted like I did matchstick quilting, those really close together lines on that ship so the sails would puff out. Here I'm ditch quilting around that wing. I had great luck on this quilt that not every curve needed a ruler. Some days you do, some days you don't. Now let's bring these flowers to life. Those little creases in there are going to give that flower some wonderful dimension. Okay, a lot of people would leave that heart completely unquilted. But it was voluminous and puffy, and I decided, no, let's quilt down those little circles. That's going to help this block. When you leave a big patch of unquilted area on a quilt, it's going to sag. It's not going to wear well. It's going to pull. You need something. So there's no great disparity between the unquilted part and all that background quilting. And I see this in quilts all the time, where they've just quilted the heck out of a quilt. And then there's all kinds of areas with no quilting at all. That's a big mistake. So this is what custom quilting looks like a lot of the time. All this tedious stuff you don't want to do, but it's going to be better for the quilt if you do. There's no way to make this type of quilting continuous. And I did not change to purple thread. I just went ahead and stuck with that darker version of beige. It worked out just fine. Consider it good practice. How can I quilt a perfect circle? I don't know how to quilt a perfect circle, but this is good practice. This was not the only place on the quilt where I was doing this. There were a couple of others. Namely, this rabbit. I could not quilt over his eye. Embellishments need to be left off until last, but invariably one will slip in. This is the frame. I did this little viney thing here that I think is great. Here's a look at all of the letters and the figures around the alphabet. See how much the quilting did for those flowers? Oh, look at that dimension. I love it. Okay, the fruit bowl. You can't leave all that unquilted, but how much are you really going to do? So I did quilt around all the watermelon seeds. I did not quilt the pineapple because of the embroidery on top. I wish I had trapuntoed the pears and apples. Well, the client loved the quilt, as did I. We think it looks great. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll catch you next time.